And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Young people, good afternoon. We know these words were spoken by Mordecai to Esther. This is how we have ended every class. Why? Because this is the key phrase that has and shows the great realization of the providence of God. This phrase can be understood in all of our lives, not as coming to the kingdom as Esther, but in whatever circumstance we may be in. That it might just be for our sakes or for someone else, that you're in the situation you are in, or the actions or words that you have taken or spoken. You see, young people, many of the circumstances or trials in our personal lives don't necessarily have anything to do with us in terms of the reason for it. It could be for someone else entirely. And so we look to our brother Robert Roberts, who says this in The Ways of Providence. I quote, that there should be such a thing as providence is reasonable in view of the fact that God has purpose among the nations of the earth, as revealed in prophecy of political matters. This purpose would never be realized were the endless impulses of the human action not subject to vigilant divine supervision, carefully guiding events at the turning points. End quote. We left off with the Jews in a state of utter hopelessness. But you see, the build-up is to show one of the great principles in the book of Esther. It's that of providence, young people. And I do believe I have experienced something along a similar vein. Something exceptional that I would like to share with you all this afternoon, because all seemed lost. But deliverance did indeed arise from another place. But you see, providence doesn't necessarily mean good, or a good thing will happen. It means that the end result will produce something that is good, that is better, even despite the immediate result that might seem like the opposite, or even if it seems like the complete opposite of what the short-term results that we will look at this afternoon. You see, many events don't turn out like the one I will share this afternoon, but they can, and they have. Now, this topic is different from one that I would normally give, but due to the circumstances, I believe I'm obliged to share it with you all. I have no idea why this happened to me, but clearly I needed shaping. I've never shared so much personally during a talk, but please remember, this is not to draw attention to myself, but to give all the glory to God and to show His amazing hand in our lives. And because of the nature and amount of personal information, I ask that no recording screenshots or pictures be taken. There are a lot of I's and a lot of me's, but really this talk has nothing to do with me. I mean, incidentally it does, of course, but tonight is all about the hand of God working in our lives. Please come with me to a verse found in Mark chapter 7. A few verses, in fact. Mark 7, we'll begin at verse 31. It says, "And again, departing from the coasts of Tyre and Sidon, he came unto the Sea of Galilee, through the midst of the coasts of Decapolis. And they bring unto him one that was deaf, and had an impediment in his speech. And they beseech him to put his hand upon him. And he took him aside from the multitude, and put his fingers in his ears, and he spit, and touched his tongue. And looking up to heaven, he sighed, and said unto him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And straightway his ears were opened, and the string of his tongue was loosed. And he spake plain, and he charged them that they should tell no man. But the more he charged them, so much the more, a great deal, they published it, and were beyond measure astonished, saying, He hath done all things well. He maketh both the deaf to hear and the dumb to speak. young people, I haven't been told to tell no man. And so I will preach from the mountain tops how God has performed a miracle. This class is really a brief snapshot of what happened and the events surrounding what occurred on that perilous day in 2019. I have given this talk before, and so I do apologize if you have already heard it. Please bear with me. Put yourself in the shoes and feelings of this individual. You feel a cold wave wash over your body. You think you are sleeping. Are you dreaming? But you look up into the vast sky at night and realize there's nothing in it but pitch black darkness so vast that that's all you know. Time has no meaning. It doesn't exist anymore. You do not know if you are breathing or if your heart is pumping. As a matter of fact, they have both stopped. You've just died. But of course, you don't realize this because there is no thought in death unless you are revived or resurrected, when you suddenly come to realize what has just happened of recent, or you are witnessing the events. On August 31st, 2019, there was a distinct and peculiar noise that we hear about once a month in Caledonia where we live. Now, what is that siren, you ask? It's the Caledonia Fire Station siren to alert the completely volunteer-run group of firefighters that they are needed imminently. Why were they needed so urgently this day? Well, let's let the news anchor tell you.
We begin in Haldimand County, where two men are in hospital with life-threatening injuries following two separate collisions on the same day. Police putting out a warning to the public to drive with extra caution during the long weekend. CTV's Heather Centerin is back from Haldimand County and joins us with more on this. Heather, this is always a busy time of year on the roads.
It is, Leanne, and police admit that usually means roads are jam-packed with travelers, but this weekend proved to be extremely dangerous with two crashes hours apart.
The drive looks clear now, but that wasn't the case on Saturday. The roads in Haldimand County covered in chaos.
But there was car parks everywhere. It was littered to the highway.
The first of two serious collisions happened right in front of this resident's Caledonia home on Highway 6. Just before 7:30 a.m., a brutal head-on crash.
The two cars were completely totaled. From the front end, you wouldn't be able to tell what they were.
An SUV was being driven by a 40-year-old female traveling northbound on Highway 6. And that vehicle traveled into the southbound lane and struck a sedan.
The driver of the sedan, a 23-year-old Glanbrook man, remains in hospital with life-threatening injuries. The female driver of the SUV suffered non-life-threatening injuries. Charges are pending.
But the lady got out of the car. She got put on a stretcher right away, and she was already in a neck brace.
Another crash just after 6 p.m. Saturday, east of Port Dover and Nanticoke. This time a single vehicle crash. A car rolled over onto its roof and was partially submerged in a pond. Inside the car, a father with his two children, an 8-year-old boy and 5-year-old girl.
Police say a family member was following behind in another vehicle, and with the help of other witnesses, they managed to get the children and the man out of the vehicle before first responders arrived.
Police say the children were not injured. The 38-year-old man from Woodstock is still in hospital with life-threatening injuries.
The male was unresponsive. Resuscitation efforts were conducted at the scene. Ambulance transported the male to hospital.
It is unclear why the car left the roadway. During the busy long weekend, police are urging drivers to stay alert at all times.
No text or phone call is worth, your life or the the lives of anyone else.
OPP planned to crack down on distracted and dangerous driving during the rest of the weekend.
When it comes to both crashes, police say the investigations are still ongoing. Anyone who witnessed anything is being asked to contact police. Police say that weather is not believed to be a factor in either of the crashes. Leanne?
Heather Centerin reporting tonight. Thanks, Heather.
At this time, Brother Stephen and Sister Riel McFarlane were out visiting in Victoria, and they asked us to be their house sitters, for which we were happy to, because it would be a mini vacation for us at their house. And what was even more exciting is Kayla and I, we had the huge blessing, with some help, of soon moving into our first house, as the housing market is pretty tough. And yes, this was back in 2019. I realize the foolishness has only increased, very much so. So this was a very exciting time for us. The move was planned for Saturday, August 31st, 2019. One of the most exciting things from a natural's perspective, moving into your first house. We received the keys the day before from the lawyer, and now we were finally ready to move in. Neither of us slept overly well that night, as we were so excited to get the move on the way. We had a U-Haul rented to move our stuff from the basement apartment we had with our brother Josh and Sister Hannah Hodges' home to our new place in Caledonia. We had organized a group of people to come and help us move later in the day. This was going to be the last day we house sat at the McFarlanes. So we packed all our stuff into the van that we were borrowing from Dad and Mom Hodges to make trips until the U-Haul was ready to be picked up, which I was planning to do in the morning. So I took our little car, a sedan, and brought all my precious things, as some would say. My Bible bag, my laptop, my school bag, my hospital ID card, a few clothes, most of my tools to fix a shelf, and some other odds and sods. I was planning to go to the house to fix some shelving in one of the rooms, but Kayla wasn't sure I would go or not, as we had discussed multiple options. Kayla said goodbye to me, and with Mom Redmond headed out to finish packing the van at our apartment. And then I got in my car, backed out of the driveway, and headed up Highway 6 to the new house. A bright, sunny, clear day with almost nobody on the road, unlike what the news anchor said. It was a beautiful day. What a great day it was going to be. And then my life ended as I knew it, right there. I was clinically dead. I had no idea what had happened. I had no thoughts. Those who saw the accident or were coming up to the accident pulled over on the shoulder on either side. This included this young woman, Kaylin Richard. A young lady stopped and asked about the person in the car, which was in the ditch. Indication was that there was nothing that could be done for him. Unsatisfied that no one was with the individual in the car, she walked down to the destroyed vehicle to find a young man trapped in the vehicle. She noted the moaning, the blood gushing out of his body from multiple locations, the quick breathing, and thought that he was about to die. She thought to herself, no one should die alone. And so she stayed with him, speaking to him that help was on the way. She could only touch a small part of his shoulder that was clear of shattered glass to help encourage him to slow his breathing. And soon after her comforting words, his breathing slowed. Another woman came and reached into the car to find a wallet on the other side of the vehicle. She opened the wallet and learned that this man's name was Jacob Hodge. The first man talked about in the news was myself. And the second man talked about, who rolled his car but didn't run into anything, was in the intensive care unit in the same hospital as myself, a few beds over. But he never made it. The angel of the Lord encampeth round about them that fear him and delivereth them. Cars were still getting around and getting by, and among them was Kayla. Because of the joy of the day, she didn't look, because she knew this was going to be a day full of happiness, and did not want to see any horrible sights from the accident. Intrigued, as we all would, Mom Redmond, who was with Kayla, looked, but didn't recognize any of the vehicles or people, and hence Kayla pressed on to drive around the mess. The highway was shut down for over 9 hours. Emergency vehicles began rushing by Kayla to the site. I was driving a 2006 Volvo S60, which weighs about 3,400 pounds, which for a small sedan is fairly heavy. A Honda Civic of the same year, for example, is 700 pounds lighter, or a Corolla 900 pounds lighter. But this was no match for a Dodge Nitro, weighing in excess of 4,200 pounds. That's the front seat, where I would have been sitting. The air ambulance was called, and this was the report by the paramedics that were on scene. There was a head-on collision between two vehicles on Highway 6 at Unity Road. Vehicles were estimated to be traveling at 80 kilometers an hour to 100 kilometers an hour. One driver in each vehicle. According to police, the other vehicle, driven by a female, crossed into oncoming and hit the other vehicle with a male patient in his 20s. Haldeman Hamilton primary care paramedics crew arrived at scene first, followed by a Hamilton primary care paramedic ambulance. Orange and the nearest advanced care paramedic crew were dispatched for additional care. Six Nations advanced care paramedics had arrived and left scene before Orange could arrive, or the air ambulance. Triage by Hamilton unit towards male patient, who was unconscious, while a female patient had superficial injuries. As per police, the female patient admitted to drinking wine. And using cocaine. Haldeman ambulance transported female to Hamilton General Hospital. Hamilton primary care paramedic accompanied Six Nations advanced care paramedic as patient had significant potential to arrest during transport. Prior to the unit's arrival, driver B, in other words, the male, myself, was trapped and was still trapped for several minutes until cut from wreckage by fire. Her injuries were non-life-threatening. Unfortunately for myself, I was in an unresponsive, comatose state, trapped inside the vehicle. The firefighter, Phil White, assessed the situation and thought that I would not survive. It took every piece of extraction equipment the fire truck was equipped with to get me out of the car. Phil, with the help of others, including Paul, a paramedic, lifted me up onto a stretcher and took me to the hospital. The air ambulance had been called. There were at least 3 ambulances on scene, but the helicopter was too slow, so they took me by road, as the report said, to the nearest trauma hospital, the General Hospital in Hamilton. I was in decorticate posturing initially, which looks like this, from the scene of the accident, a sign of a brain injury. Young people, once I was brought into the emergency department, they realized I had serious internal bleeding and I needed to get into surgery immediately. And so some of my family, who had been notified and was at the hospital, including Kayla, had to say goodbye to me again that day. The family shared in hugs, a few tears, and I was whisked off from them for immediate emergency surgery. Would I ever come back? No doubt there were doubts as to whether I would make it out alive. My spleen had ruptured. I had broken ribs, a broken sternum, bleeding all over my body. And worse yet, a catastrophic brain injury. Have you seen what internal bleeding looks like? When it's mostly cleared up, we have an image. This is when it's mostly cleared up. This, young people, is where prayer is a huge blessing from our Heavenly Father. In times when all seems lost, when all is completely and utterly left up to Him. This man, Dr. Timothy Rice, saved my life. I'd be 6 feet under without him. But of course, it's not because of him. It was because of the workings of God that day, through many individuals, that I am still alive. And so my house, my new home, was not quite what I thought it would end up being. Neither was it the home that my wife thought it was going to be. But what a blessing that after the intensive care unit stay, my wife was able to sleep near me during a time such as this. My brain had suffered a severe injury, 5 brain contusions and 1 contusion on my brain stem. I had what is called a diffuse axonal injury, which is when the soft part of the brain is damaged due to it crashing against the skull. the long fibers in the brain, called axons, are sheared or torn apart as the brain rapidly accelerates and decelerates inside the hard bone of the skull. Essentially, you could think of it like severe bruising, where the blood vessels break and blood pools under the skin. But this was happening on my brain. Well, there's a few stages of blood loss. 10 to 15%. When you lose that much, you feel a little bit lightheaded. The second stage, 15 to 30% of your blood, your skin will start to feel cool. You'll feel weak. Your heart will start beating fast to keep you alive, to keep the blood moving to all your vital organs. The third stage, just below 40% of your blood, you need a blood transfusion. This is when your heart will start beating very, very fast. At 40% blood loss, your smaller blood vessels will constrict or get smaller. They'll close tightly to keep the blood moving as quickly as it can. So that's when you may hear over the PA system at a hospital, code omega, or code transfusion to the emergency department, indicating that someone is bleeding out. And then there's the fourth stage. Your heart, after you lose 50% or half of your blood, at 2.75 liters on average, you will then be in a comatose state. Your heart will stop beating, and your organs will stop receiving that vital fuel, causing them to fail. You need rapid treatment right away to survive. And at this point, they say it's unlikely you will survive, as at some point in the immediate future, you will be clinically dead. Your heart stops. You've reached cardiac arrest. That's at 50% blood loss. Now, the water bottles on the front, I'm sure you've been wondering what they are. I don't drink that much water. I probably don't drink that much water in a week. But all the water bottles up here represents, for my height and weight at that time, all the blood in my body. This is what I had left. That is what I lost. I had lost between 60 to 70% of all my blood. I was resuscitated in the ambulance and on several occasions at the hospital. From that spot on the road, it takes a normal person to drive to the hospital, the regional trauma center, about 24 minutes. But I'm sure the ambulance did it in about half that time. Now, the Glasgow Coma scale is used to determine a person's consciousness after a brain injury. A severe head injury is below 8, moderate 9 to 12, and mild 13 to 15. A score of 3 is the lowest or worst score you can get. In other words, you are brain dead. You are never getting out of that coma. And I was put on a 5. Because of this, when I did wake up, if I was going to wake up, there was never any guarantee that I would understand anything or know anyone. For a few days, they hadn't ruled out paralysis. I don't know how to put this nicely, young people, but I had to learn everything again, and hence needed help doing everything again, which includes going to the bathroom, how to control your bladder, your bowels, how to eat, how to swallow, how to get changed, how to walk, how to shower, you name it. I had to learn it, just like a child or someone near the end of their life. It's a humbling experience. and they estimated many of these things would take months, years, or that I would never recuperate. But young people, not only did I survive, but many of these things only took days, a few weeks. And so I had a ruptured spleen, a massive brain injury with 6 contusions, causing a DAI, diffuse axonal injury. I had a torn ACL, PCL, MCL, FCL. I didn't even know you had that many ligaments. Your popliteus tendon in my left knee. My head was hit so hard that my body thought I needed a new bone in my knee. So it started forming a new bone, which is called heterotopic ossification, due to my brain injury. It was telling my knee that it needed to be stronger. It needed more bone, apparently. I had memory loss, bruised lungs and internal organs, fractured ribs, a broken sternum, cuts and gashes all over my body. I lost most of my blood. I had cellulitis, near to sepsis, and so on and so forth. On that first day at the hospital, I had a doctor assigned to follow me around, to keep me alive whenever I needed resuscitation. That was Dr. Rice that I showed you a picture of. Feel free to come chat to me after about my knee restriction, about the hole they attempted to put in my skull, causing an additional brain bleed, about the 5-day induced coma that I was put in for my brain to heal, for the scars I have, the nurse that butchered multiple attempts to put an IV in my wrist, and so on, as there were many significant things that took place over this period of time. Young people, it was expected that I would be in the hospital for months. And that I would be in a wheelchair with a feeding tube. And I would be slow for the rest of my life. But God had other plans. What happened was I left the hospital in 18 days. Returned to my clinical placement several weeks after I returned home. In June the following year, I passed my Canada-wide board certification exam. Which requires a little bit of brain power. I was called before I had even passed my national exam for hiring by one of the directors of the Grand River Hospital. I'd never met them, never seen them, never talked to them, no interview, no nothing. And she just gave me the job. Another blessing from our gracious Heavenly Father. After a year of experience, I got a better job, closer to home, and most importantly, closer to the ecclesia. And this is where I was doing my clinical placement for about 2 weeks before the accident happened. And now I work there. I was discharged from going to physiotherapy after a year, as I had come nearly back to normal. I am running nearly every week now. And God has so well blessed me with a strong and spiritual wife and a child. With my brain injury, we never expected or ever assumed that I would be able and physically capable to produce a seed. God willing, we will do our utmost to raise a godly seed. And now, young people, I'm sure that most wouldn't ever know that these events ever happened, as I'm nearly back to where I was, all by God's mercies. This verse, Lamentations 3, verses 22 to 23, is now on our bedroom wall, which we hold dearly to our hearts. Thank you, fishes. It is of Yahweh's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. When I was in the hospital, my family would take shifts so that someone was always there. Now, there was a fairly significant event that took place after I had just left the ICU. Josh, my brother, sitting in the back, was leaving his shift of duty, and his final words to me were, "Be strong." He paused, and apparently I looked back at him and said, "And of a good courage." This was a very emotional moment, as he knew that I knew what he was referring to, that I still had some inkling of spiritual thoughts and could finish the phrase he started. And so he created this board for me and brought it to me on August 31st, 2020, exactly a year later. And we've since put it up on the wall. And the day after the anniversary of the accident, a year later, Kayla and I happened to walk to the community mailbox to pick up our mail. And lo and behold, we run into Kayla, the young lady who had come to the side of the car to comfort me, with her sister and mother. Amazing. She lives over an hour away now, but had just come down that night to visit her family, and we happened to run into them on our way back from the mailbox. And we've had similar astounding circumstances with the firefighter, seeing him at physiotherapy, and Paul, the paramedic, who in the middle of the night visited us in the hospital, and Jacob Martin, who was the one who called 911. Feel free to ask me after about these fascinating events that God has orchestrated. As our brother read James 4, verse 13, "Is any among you afflicted? Let him pray. Is any married? Let him sing psalms. Is any sick among you? Let him call for the elders of the ecclesia, and let them pray over him, anointing him with the oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer of faith shall save the sick, and the Lord shall raise him up. And if ye have committed sins, they shall be forgiven him. Confess your faults one to another, and pray one for another, that ye may be healed. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much." Prayer is a blessing that we often take for granted, and yet it can save someone's life. I don't believe I would be here today if it weren't for the prayers offered worldwide for God's glory to be done. And sure, in this case, it was mostly physical. But on the other side of the coin, prayer can be just as impactful for things of a spiritual nature. And prayer, as we know, may not always be answered by God in the way we think it should, but it will be answered according to his will. James chapter 4, verse 15 says, "For that ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live and do this or that." Oftentimes we forget the latter half of that verse. But young people, it's not just God willing, it's God willing. And we are still alive. By God's blessing, we can do this or that. Now, this woman who hit me clearly made a mistake. And this is one of the hardest lessons I've had to learn: forgiveness. I had to forgive, despite her potentially unchanging ways, for taking my life. What a mental struggle with all the flesh, the carnal mind. All it wants to do is have immediate justice. But the spiritual mind knows that we are all sinners and we must forgive 70 times 7. When I returned to my clinical placement, they were surprised and even angry that we weren't going to sue to get as much money as we could. I explained what we believe, that we shouldn't go to law one against another, and how that forgiveness is a hugely important principle that we must live by. One final lesson I'd like to share with you. Don't think there isn't anything you can do to help those who are struggling, going through trial. I've experienced firsthand the amazing brothers and sisters and young people at the Ecclesia of God at Book Road, and from many parts of this earth, in sharing kind words, letters, cards, thoughts, emails, pictures, videos, clothing, phone calls, meals, financial support, flowers, food, drinks, messages via various forms, snacks, blankets, spiritual help and care. And as we said before, prayer. These are the people who care most about our well-being, most importantly, spiritually, when going through trial. And it's the first place we need to go to. And when I was starting to come around again, this was the first place I wanted to go, was back to the hall, to Bible class, to meeting, for CYC, for lecture, because these are the people that will help us get to the kingdom. Young people, I was very, very close to not being the one telling you about the accident on August 31st, 2019, at 7:13 a.m. From many perspectives, I shouldn't be here. I should not be alive. But in God's eyes, things were different. And He blessed me with life, with health, and the ability to tell my own story. It is important for us to see the providence of God in our lives. A major lesson for me was not to take life for granted, live unto God, and see His hand in my life. It doesn't take a miracle for us to see His hand in our lives. It can be seen in the much smaller things of life. It doesn't have to be life-ending or altering to see His hand. Only with an open mind to His word. But now we have all seen, heard, experienced God's work in my life. So let us go forth from this point by living our lives unto God the way He would have us live. And don't underestimate the meaning of a signed card. Your name, a note of encouragement. It may be more significant than you may realize. And I want to thank you all for the cards that were sent from you. I must add, if you want to hear more about the accident, about trial and trial in general, there are classes that were given by Brother Ted Hodge, a series at our Ecclesia that you can watch on the website or on christadelphianvideos.org. But Jesus beheld them and said unto them, with men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct thy paths. Even so come, Lord Jesus. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? God willing, in our Sunday school class tomorrow, we will see how God worked with His people to develop a great faith for His glory and honor.
For his final class, The Invisible Hand of God.